So see how they took? So we don't see the knight anymore, so we know what the knight took on e5. We know what the horse he took on e5 because the queen opened up, and we were correct. So now we take here, and we're up a queen. Okay, so they took on c6. This is not a good move because I know that there was no other attacker there. There couldn't have been another attacker there, so that knight was free to take. Or I don't want to open up the file, so I have to take with the queen, which is kind of risky. This is actually not as scary as it looks, because even if there's another rook down here, we get 2 rooks for a queen.
My name is David Pakin. Back in high school, I played a little chess. We played in some of the biggest, most high-stakes events in the state.
David was able to capitalize on the position with such low times for a match. He made a few mistakes. David was somehow able to break through on the king side. It's amazing.
After college and a couple years in the real world, I got fired. Now I get to share the game that made me with all you amazing people.
Twitch.tv/David Pakin.
Yeah. He's live now. All right, chat, you know what to do.
Yeah, gotta give him a follow, totally.
We got a 10-minute game. Okay, I've actually never played a 10-minute game. Okay, so we're playing a 1400, so I should be able to explain my entire thought process. So first move I'm going to play is actually, I've started playing the Caro-Kann. And the Caro-Kann works well because you don't open up the king on the diagonal. Okay, so, by the way, when I play, because you don't open up this king on the diagonal too much, if they take here, the important thing is you do not take back. Because there are some cases where they play, like, c4. Like, let's say that they played c4 here, and then I played d5. They could have played queen a4, and if I play like knight f6 and they take, and I take, then they win the game by taking the king. So I'm gonna actually take this. Okay, so now we know that they played f3 and d3. So if this pawn, if they take this pawn and we still see the bishop because of the queen, it means they took with this pawn. If we don't see okay, so see how we don't see the pawn anymore, but we still see the bishop? It means that they took with the pawn. So now I know that there's a pawn here, and that there's a bishop here. Now I'm gonna play knight f6. And now I can see the pawn again, but like I didn't have to play knight f6 to see that the pawn was there. It's just knight f6 is the best move in this position. I don't want to get my bishop out yet because I guess technically here I could get the bishop out because I know that the pawn went from f3 to e4. So, and I can already h3, so there's no way they could really take advantage of that. So I guess I could play bishop g4 here. And now I can see the knight. So now I see the knight. So now I have knight, pawn, bishop. Here we're going to play e6. We're not worried about them having played h3 because we're covering that square. So we can see if the pawn is there, right? Our turn again. So we're going to play knight bd7. Now we still know that there's probably a bishop on d3. We know this pawn is played up. So probably there's a queen here that we're pinning the knight to. So we could probably safely assume that there's a queen here. I like knight e5 though. I like continuing with our plan. Because it's not likely that they've gotten the bishop out, because the pawn is still on d2. So I think we can actually play knight e5 safely here. I think we can play knight e5 fairly safely here. And now we're going to win the bishop, and the bishop is really important here, because the bishops are really powerful at eyeing most of the board. So see how they took? So we don't see the knight anymore, so we know what the knight took on e5. We know what the horse he took on e5, because the queen opened up, and we were correct. So now we take here, and we're up a queen. Okay, so now we're thinking about playing knight d7 to try and trade the knight. Because this is an active knight, and we're worried about them eventually playing, or we can just trade, yeah, let's just trade knights anyway. So let's just trade knights here. We know again that there's still a, probably the king took, so now there's probably a king here. There's a bishop on d3, there's a pawn on d2, the knight's not there anymore, so now there's a pawn on e4 and a knight on e5. Okay, so they took on c6. This is not a good move because I know that there was no other attacker there. There couldn't have been another attacker there, so that knight was free to take. So we don't know what they played here. We know that there's not a knight there anymore. It took over here. I think that we could safely play rook b8 because we know that the pawn probably hasn't opened up here. The pawn is probably on h2. And this just puts us on the open file and gives us more information. So now we know that the pawn is up on g3. So probably there's also a bishop on g2. On b2, excuse me. So this is b3, and then there's a bishop on b2 because they wouldn't have played b2 otherwise. By the way, when I play bishop f6, I should see a bishop over here. So the pawn's in the way. So I can't see the bishop yet because the pawn's in the way, but there's definitely a bishop on b2. Otherwise, they wouldn't have played b2. b3, excuse me. I mean, it is possible that the knight got to d6. It's not likely, But I still think it's safer to castle here because we're already up a queen for a horsey. And so the only thing we have to really worry about are like weird knight moves. By the way, an important note, this square was dark before. And now after this move, it's light. So that probably means that there was a piece there, probably a bishop to try and eye something on c8. So I think that right now we're just gonna play h6. h6, and if they try to take on h7, I don't have to risk not being able to take if they're defending it. I think we play knight b6 and knight to d5. So knight b6, knight to d5. And now we know that there's a pawn on a4. So they play e5. So I think here we can actually... So do they have a pawn on f4? No, because they took back this way. So we know we can play this. Okay, so now we see that there's a bishop here. Or I don't want to open up the file, so I have to take with the queen, which is kind of risky. And it wasn't too crazy of a risk because all we had to worry about was a knight being there. And the knight to have gotten from d1 to f2 to e4, it's a lot of moves. And they played other moves in between that were different from that, so it would just be tough for that to have been the case. Did we take a dark square bishop or a light square bishop? We can actually look back on that. We took a dark square bishop, so we're going to bring our queen back to a dark square diagonal. So that we don't have to worry about like a bishop having been here or here. Now we're going to move the rook over to the open file. We can see that the pawn is here. We're going to play c5 next and try to open up things in the center. Because our king is safely castled on the king side. And now all of our pieces are lined up to attack. Okay, so they take here. I don't think we can take this back because there's probably a pawn here. So I'm going to just play knight d5. And potentially just knight b4 because now I can see that there's a pawn here. So I can play knight b4 safely because we know there's a pawn on h4. So there's no pawn that can kick me. Because the c pawn is on c5 and the h pawn is on h4. The c pawn is on c5 and the a pawn is on a4. So there's nothing that can actually take my knight right away that way. And I'm defending it once, so if there's another piece there, I can still take it back. So we're going to play knight b4 here, hitting the bishop twice. And now we know that there's a pawn on c2, so we were correct. If we had played rook takes d3, they would have played c takes d3. And we would have been down in exchange. Okay, so they play rook f7. This is actually not as scary as it looks, because even if there's another rook down here, we get 2 rooks for a queen. They should take the queen back. They should play rook takes f7 here. Yes, okay, so we take this back, and now we know they only have a bishop and a knight left. We even might want to play king g7 just to avoid any knight e5 business. Though I think there's a pawn on e5, so I don't think they could do that. I think we're going to actually put the knight back onto d5 so that we can move our king away. Because if we assume the bishop's on c4, and we want to play king g8 next, we can't allow them to play bishop takes e6. Okay, see, and now they play knight g5. Remember I was saying I was worried about these 2 squares, and so now we can easily take it back. We were covering this square. The only square we weren't covering was e5, but remember they played e5 way back in the game. If I go back up here, right there they played e5. Let me go back so you all can see it. Remember I told you this is why highlights matter. Right there they took, when we took here, we knew that there was a pawn on e5. We also knew it back over here when they played e5 here. So I can actually see that they only have a bishop left, and we know we took a dark squared bishop earlier. So as long as I stay on light squares and don't go too far ahead where I could get taken by a pawn or a king, I should be fine. So I'm actually even going to play rook b4 here because I believe there's a bishop on c4, and I was correct, chat. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually give them back the exchange because I'm already up a knight and a rook. So it's okay for me to give some material back because I make it simpler for me to get to the winning endgame. I'm actually just going to put my king on a dark square to not even worry about any possibility of a light squared bishop taking me. Because that's the only way I could lose this game, is if this king is on a light square and I happen to move on to a light square or the bishop moves there. So now they play c3, so now I can, remember, get rid of my highlight. Remember I had a highlight on c2? I'm going to get rid of that highlight and put it on c3. And now I'm actually going to take this. Now why am I going to take this? Because there's no pawn that could be defending it. And if they do take it, it means they took it with the king. And now, by doing so, okay, they resign. But by doing so, I open up the rook, and I can see that there is a bishop there now. So I think that was a pretty solid game.